Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, Nelson. It's been a while. It's been a long time. Vacation has been great. Break has been great. Right now I'm in Indiana in my family's house, and right now since there's been a lot of news going around in the sports world right now, I figured I'd do a live segment to start off the week. Let me know in the comments if you guys missed me. You guys probably didn't. You guys probably have other things to do. But aside from that, in the first segment, we are going to talk about the Giants completely ruining their draft slot and giving up the first overall pick. We're going to talk about how they did that. Then in the second segment, we are going to talk about D'Angelo Russell getting traded to the Brooklyn Nets again. And in the third segment, we're going to talk about the Sacramento Kings firing their head coach, Mike Brown, sort of like possibilities for why he was fired and my thoughts on him getting fired. And then in the fourth segment, we're going to quickly recap Week 17 of the NFL, talk about the teams that are in the hunt for the playoffs as we go into Week 18, what has to happen for those teams in order to make the playoffs in the end, and scenarios that could go wrong for them. So we also have a special fifth segment at the end of the fourth segment, so be sure to stay tuned for that if you guys are interested. Before I begin, though, I'd like to remind everybody that we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether it's a hot take, whether it's a burning question, or whether it's something that you're just dying to share. We're all ears, and if you really want your comment and or question to get noticed, then I recommend using Super Chat. You just click on the $ below the chat box, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. If Super Chat's not your thing, you can always use the link displayed below the ticker and use that link on the gsmcpodcast.net. You can send in your comments and or donations that way. Either or helps the show. It makes it much more interactive between myself and you guys. So let's go ahead, rip the Band-Aid off, and talk about the Giants just completely destroying their chances at getting the number one overall pick in this draft. There was no way that the Giants could have messed this up. There was absolutely no way that the Giants could have messed this up, and here they are messing it up once again. It's a pain being a fan of this franchise. Even when they win, it is a pain being this franchise. And it was probably one of the worst weekends for football, at least in recent memory. Like, all the Giants had to do was lose. That is all they had to do. They've been doing that so well throughout the entirety of this season. They have 13 losses in this entire season. And they were on a losing streak of losing like 11 games. All they had to do was lose. You could not mess that up with the way that they were playing. And they win out of nowhere. And it wasn't just like a 13-7 win or something like that. It wasn't like a tiny win. They put up 45 points in this game. Drew Lock just decided to turn into Eli Manning in this one and throw 4 touchdown passes and run in for a touchdown. He had 5 total touchdowns. There has never been a Giant since Eli Manning to put up a stat line like that. He also accumulated 309 yards in the air. He did not throw a single interception. Malik Neighbors played probably the best game of his life as well. He recorded 171 receiving yards in 2 touchdowns in just 7 total receptions in this game. It was unbelievable how he played. And he's been having probably one of the best wide receiver seasons in my opinion. Think about it. He's had 4 different starting quarterbacks, and he already has 1,000 receiving yards, 100 receptions, and 4 different quarterbacks. Imagine if he has a good, solid, young quarterback that he can team up with. Like, he would have a ridiculous season. But of course, apparently, that's not what he wants either. I don't know what this is. I don't know what happened. Maybe Malik Neighbors didn't like playing catch with Shador in New York. I don't know why the Giants decided to win this game, but all they had to do was lose, and they could still have the number 1 pick in the draft. They dropped from 1 all the way down to 4. And it seems very unlikely that they are going to get the number one pick, there's a few things that's going to have to happen. First, for one thing, I know the Patriots are going to have to lose are going to have to win. The Patriots are going to have to win against the Bills, and I don't think that's going to happen at all. And I mean, the Bills are just a fantastic team. Maybe the Bills are going to bench their starters, and that'll give them a chance. But I don't think they're going to blow the number one pick. Like how the Giants blew the number one pick. Let me show you something. Let's see. Well, first of all, it has to pop up first. That's one thing that has to. There we go. You see this? You see these cleats? Those are Giants cleats. They're custom made. You know whose cleats those are? Shedeur Sanders, one of the best quarterbacks in college football right now. He didn't really have a good game against BYU in that bowl game. I don't think it was really his fault. I think the defense didn't. They messed up a couple of tackles here and there against BYU, and the offensive line was just unable to block and give Shedeur time to throw. The receivers were dropping passes. Even Travis Hunter was dropping passes, and it wasn't a very good game from Shedeur Sanders. But still, this is a young quarterback who wants to be a New York Giant, and we just straight up spat on him almost in this game, dropping 45 points. And while this is embarrassing as a Giants fan, I think this is a little bit more embarrassing on the Colts side, because how do you let the Giants score 45 points in this game? And Joe Flacco got outplayed by Drew Lock. That is a sentence that I never thought I would say. And I don't think Joe Flacco is a competent quarterback anymore. I didn't really expect Drew Lock to outplay him completely in this game. Now, the defense for the Colts was absolutely pitiful. This was, at the time of this game, the Colts had a chance of making the playoffs. All they had to do was win this game and move on to the next game and see if they can win that and get a little bit of help. But of course, they messed that up, and they let the Giants just walk right over them. It was absolutely embarrassing for both sides, really. I don't think either of the teams that were participating in this game won in the end of the day, because the Colts, they ended up losing a playoff spot. They're completely eliminated from playoff contention right now. And the Giants, they've already been eliminated from playoff contention, but now they can't even capitalize on getting a number one pick in Shedeur or Cam Ward. Either one of those quarterbacks, in my opinion, will be fine, and I think they will be really good in the NFL. And the Giants just blew the opportunity. There's really no other way around it. They blew it. He custom made. He had these custom made. I don't know how much money that cost, but to him it's probably pocket change. But still, of all the teams in the NFL, he had these ones custom made. He had the Giants custom made. And we blew it. We blew it. It's sad. It is very, very sad. And this is the one time that I'm actually extremely disappointed that the Giants ended up winning and dropping 45 points, no less. You rarely ever see the Giants score 40 points or drop 4, maybe even 3 touchdowns in a game. It's a very rare sight that they do that. And they were able to do this on quite possibly the worst time possible. It's the one time you need them to lose, they don't know how to lose. So again, there has to be a lot of situations that come into effect if the Giants still land the number one pick. There's going to be a lot that needs to come into play. So like I said, the Patriots, they're going to have to win against the Bills. The Browns are also going to have to win against the Ravens, which is another possibility that I don't think is going to happen. And then the Titans, they're going to also have to win against the Houston Texans, a probability that's it seems like that's a little the most likely team that could end up pulling off an upset against a competent team, because the Texans, they've been struggling a little bit. So the Titans winning could be a possibility. I don't think that's going to happen, but it could be. And of course, the Giants are going to have to lose. So they're going to have to expect either one of those 3 teams to pull off a win in the final week. And I think the most likely team to pull off that win is going to be the Titans. Now, obviously, the Texans, they're already going to have a playoff spot secured because they are the leader in their division and they're going to host a home wild card game. So, not entirely sure if the Titans are going to take that game seriously and keep the starters in. In fact, I don't even think the Patriots are going to keep the starters in their game. But again, once the third string is in, anything can really happen in the NFL. And it's still a possibility that they get a high pick, whether or not they're going to get a higher pick than any of those teams that are most likely going to draft a quarterback. Not entirely sure, because the Patriots, I don't think they're going to draft a quarterback. They might go ahead and get Travis Hunter. I'm not entirely sure. But again, drafting Travis Hunter as the number one pick, I think that's a little bit too much to ask. Unless they're going to have him playing both positions. Again, still a little bit too much to ask. They might trade down. Like, they might listen to other teams that might want that number one pick and settle for a lower pick. The Browns, on the other hand, they are a team that is in desperate need of a quarterback. Same thing with the Titans. So having both of those teams being in a draft selection spot higher than the Giants, it seems very, very unlikely that either Cam or Shador are going to be able to be a New York Giant at the end of the day, which is what really scares me. And there's, again, a lot of possibilities that have to happen, but it's all that I have in this first segment. So now we're going to go ahead and keep our focus with New York sports. This time we're going to focus on basketball. D'Angelo Russell was recently traded to the Brooklyn Nets, so I will talk about that right after this short break, so be sure to stay tuned if you guys are interested.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose, if it's some loose shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
And we are back with the second segment of the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by, just adjusting my mic, the GSMC Sports Network. And in the second segment, we're going to be talking about the D'Angelo Russell trade. It recently happened, I think, Sunday, maybe Saturday, this trade happened. It did happen like a couple of days ago, so I'm going to go ahead and talk about this. Before I begin, I would like to remind everybody that we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether it's a hot take, whether it's a burning question, something you're dying to share. We're all ears. If you want your comment or question to get noticed, then I recommend using Super Chat. You just click on the $ below the chat box. If that's not really your thing, then you can also use the link displayed below the ticker, gsmcpodcast.net, and send in your comments and or donations that way. Either or really helps the show, makes it much more interactive between myself and you guys. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into this second segment, which is talking about D'Angelo Russell and his recent trade. You like that jersey swap that I did there? Well, D'Lo, this has happened to him before. Like, ironically enough, this exact scenario has happened to him before. In his first few years with the Lakers, he played with them, and then the Lakers decided to trade him over to Brooklyn. Then, out of nowhere, when he was on Minnesota, then later on Golden State, the Lakers decided to trade him back to the Lakers, all for them to just trade him back to the Nets. So he's going back and forth, and it's it's a little bit ironic how of all the teams that he gets traded to, it's the Brooklyn Nets that the Lakers decide to trade him back to. And I'm curious how that's going to work, given that D'Angelo Russell, he plays point guard, and then there's also Cam Thomas, who also plays point guard for the Nets, which is it's a very confusing why the Nets would want D'Angelo Russell back, but again, not really going to complain about that. Now, in this trade, the Lakers, they traded not just D'Lo, they also traded Maxwell Lewis as well as 3 second-round picks to the Nets in exchange for Dorian Finney-Smith and Shake Milton. This was the blockbuster trade that all the Lakers fans were expecting. And of course, the trade ended up being a little bit of a dud. This is not Zach LaVine, and I expected the Lakers to trade for Zach LaVine, and they still have not done that yet. I don't know I still don't know what's going on in Chicago. I don't understand what exactly their goal is. I don't get it. They keep trying to win with Zach LaVine, and it's just proven that it doesn't work, yet they still want to keep him on the roster. I don't understand. And the Lakers, they've said that they were going to, do a trade eventually, but this, Dorian Finney-Smith, that's the player that the Lakers desperately wanted to get in the trade. That's who they decided to give up 3 second-round picks for. Dorian Finney-Smith. Now, I will say that this puts them a little bit under the salary cap. So that is a plus for the Lakers, putting them below the salary cap and not needing to pay D'Angelo Russell all of that money. But again, Dorian Finney-Smith, while they do need a 3-and-D player, and that's what Dorian Finney-Smith is, most of the time when Lakers trade for a 3-and-D player, it doesn't end up turning out as well as they expected to. Really, Dorian Finney-Smith, I'm still caught up on that trade. That's really who they decided to go grab with the assets that they had. It does not make any sense to me. So, again, it gives the Lakers a versatile 3-and-D player. He averaged 10 points per game, 4 rebounds per game in the season for the Nets, I will say that. And he's also played for the Nets since Kyrie Irving got traded to the Dallas Mavericks back in 2023. And he's shooting a career-high 43% from 3 in this season. And he's also known as being a very competent defender. I completely understand the Dorian Finney-Smith move. But again, I just don't think it's going to pan out the way that it works, and I don't think that this is the trade that the Lakers should have been pursuing when there were other players in the trade market like Zach LaVine. And speaking of the trade market, I might as well go ahead and talk about the possibilities and some other trade rumors that have been going around, because there are some teams that are expecting to trade some of their players. I know that Jonas Valanciunas is one of those players that's expected to be traded and is going to be on the trade block very soon, because we do know the trade deadline is approaching. The trade deadline is, I believe, around February 6th, maybe February 8th, something like that. And Valanciunas is a big name on the trade block, as well as Malcolm Brogdon, Jordan Clarkson. But again, these guards, they are not Zach LaVine, and they're not the kinds of guards that I think the Lakers would want. And for Jonas Valanciunas, the Lakers, they had a chance of grabbing Jonas Valanciunas in free agency, yet they chose not to, which, again, another confusing move from the Lakers. They keep messing up chances, and speaking of which, I completely forgot to mention this, happy birthday to LeBron, the greatest basketball player of all time. He turns 40 this year. Again, 40. Meaning there's most likely not going to be many years that you're going to have LeBron. So LA needs to make a big move while they have LeBron. And they keep messing that up. And with this trade, with all the pieces that they've given up, those are some assets that you can give to other teams that might intrigue them a little bit in the future. Now, again, they're just second-round picks. They're not first-round picks, so teams aren't really going to be, jumping the gun for those second-round picks, as they are going to be jumping the gun for first-round picks. But still, these are assets that you can put in a trade, and they wasted it on Dorian Finney-Smith, in my opinion. I'm not entirely sure whether or not Dorian Finney-Smith is going to be able to fit in the Lakers system, but he should theoretically. But again, they just have bad luck with 3-and-D players the last few times that they traded them, which is why I'm still a little bit skeptical on this. And while they did, the picks that they also gave up, the second round picks were for 2027, 2030, and 2031. I feel like I should mention that. And the pick in 2027 only conveys to Brooklyn if it doesn't go to Utah, which is another thing that I should have added before. And this would happen if the Lakers' first round pick that year lands in the top 4. And they also created a trade exception for $3,768,000, which is good through next December 29th. So already done. And it's likely going to be a limited value, but you're never going to really, you never know exactly how these trades work and how the market works with these kinds of things. Now, at best, the Milton as a replacement level is going to be a shoot-first guard whose minimum contract money is going to be non-guaranteed for this season. So, obviously, the most important piece that the Lakers wanted in this trade was Dorian Finney-Smith, which again, not entirely sure how that's going to work, but 43% from 3, that is very promising, especially in a system where J.J. Redick is the coach, and J.J. Redick extremely, he values the three-point shot a lot. We've seen it in the way that he plays and the way that he coaches. The team really, much more than last year's team, they like shooting the 3-ball. And I still think that J.J. Redick has been putting the Lakers in a very, very good position to win these games. It's just they need more talent on the roster. And that's sort of a thing that I realized in this season as the Lakers continue to lose a couple of games. Now, they have a winning record, so it's not all bad. They did not have a winning record at this point of the year when Darvin Ham was their coach. But again, the talent is just not all there. Part of that is because D'Angelo Russell was playing probably some of the worst basketball that he's ever played until recently. And maybe with him off of the roster, things will change. But again, not entirely sure how this is going to work at the end of the day. And it's honestly just funny how D'Angelo Russell gets traded from the Lakers back to the Nets twice. And ironically enough, this isn't the first time that that a player has gone to a team in almost a similar scenario. I mean, I remember the Lakers, they traded Russell Westbrook over to Utah, and then Utah immediately waived him. And then the Clippers, the other LA team, they ended up getting rid of Russell Westbrook, sent him back to Utah, and then he got waived again. It's it's a deja vu time and a deja vu moment in the NBA. But it's again, this is a very weird trade. I don't think this was the trade that Lakers fans were looking for, and we're just going to have to see whether or not Dorian Finney-Smith can fit in the Lakers system. But that's all that I have in this second segment. So now we're going to go ahead and get into the third segment where we talk about the Sacramento Kings firing their head coach and some of the reasons why he might have been fired, as well as my opinions on him getting fired. So I'll be right back after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, we're going to talk about the Kings firing their head coach, Mike Brown. And we're going to dive right into this third segment really quick. So, as we know, Mike Brown, he's been the coach for the Kings for a while now, and he is the one responsible for lifting the Kings out of mediocrity, so to speak. And he became the first head coach in a while to actually lead the Sacramento Kings to a playoff game. The first playoff game that they've had since like 2005, 2004, around that time. So they've had a long drought of playoff success. And this is the first coach that they end up making it to the playoffs with. And they ended up pulling the plug on him, and they decided to part ways with him for whatever reason. In my opinion, he's just a scapegoat for all of the problems that the Kings have on the roster. And I did not expect the Kings to go to a move this drastic as firing their head coach, a coach that brought them to the playoffs. Like, I don't agree with this firing whatsoever. Like, I think the Kings, they have way more problems in their roster than they want to believe. And the coach, firing the coach, was the only thing that they sort of saw fit and like to give someone the blame, aside from giving their GM the blame for even trading for DeMar DeRozan. Like, think of it this way. DeMar has gotten 2 head coaches fired, and both of those head coaches won Coach of the Year. Like, he got the Toronto Raptors head coach, he got him fired, and indirectly, of course, like, he didn't like purposely want this head coach to get fired. And again here with the Kings, like, the situation with the Raptors was that they were never able to pass LeBron. They ended up getting the best record in the Eastern Conference back in 2018, and after they ended up getting swept by LeBron again, because of course LeBron is just that good. The head coach for the Raptors ends up getting fired. Now, DeRozan played absolutely atrocious in that series, and he's been terrible in playoff games in general. And ultimately, the Raptors, they ended up firing the coach, and they ended up getting rid of DeMar DeRozan. Lo and behold, without DeMar, the Raptors end up winning the first championship in their franchise's history. And here we are again, where the Kings, they ended up making it to the playoffs. They get DeMar DeRozan. DeMar DeRozan doesn't play as well as he should, and ultimately ends up getting this coach fired. Now, there was a new report that recently came out about the Kings, saying that Mike Brown asked DeMar DeRozan to come off the bench before he ended up getting fired. So maybe that was the reason why he ended up getting fired, and the GMs just didn't, and the owner just didn't like that idea. I was contemplating maybe putting DeMar DeRozan on the bench and making him come off the bench would be a much better option for the Kings, as opposed to having him start alongside with Sabonis and De'Aaron Fox. Like, I thought maybe that would have been a much better option for the team, and for the team to be able to win games, as opposed to having DeMar start with De'Aaron Fox as well as Sabonis and having them share the court a hefty amount of minutes. And this is also the first time in a while that the Kings have lost consecutive games to the Lakers. Sabonis, before this season, never lost to Anthony Davis. And now with J.J. Redick as the coach, and with the rest of this Lakers team, the Kings have lost to the Lakers, I believe, in 4 different matchups, and the Lakers completely sweep them in those matchups. And again, I think this problem ultimately comes down to the roster management and signing DeMar DeRozan. The Kings, their 3 best players are inside the arc scorers. De'Aaron Fox is not that competent of a 3-point shooter, and regardless, he doesn't even attempt as many 3-pointers as you would think, because obviously, his strength is getting to the basket and making difficult layups and making dunks as well. He is a very fantastic player in that regard. Sabonis, he is also an inside-the-arc scorer. He's more of a post player. He gets in the mid-range area and he converts his shots that way. And we all know DeMar is far from a 3-point shooter, despite his increase in 3-point attempts. His dominant area is in the mid-range game. Having those 3 players in the starting lineup, being your best players, is not a formula for winning basketball anymore. Like, you have to have three-point shooters. And on top of that, to make matters worse, those three players are not solid defenders. Like, if you don't have competent players on your roster that can shoot the three and play defense, you're not going to be able to win many basketball games. And that's the problem that the Kings have sort of gotten themselves into when they signed DeMar DeRozan. Like, having DeMar in the starting lineup with those two players is a recipe for disaster because, again, none of those players can defend. On top of that, the Kings have also lost the most close single-digit games, and an area of the game that DeMar DeRozan was recently getting praised for was the fact that he was a closer. When he was on Chicago, he ended up hitting multiple game-winning shots and also propelled the Chicago Bulls to winning several close games. That aspect of his game has gotten weaker, and it makes complete sense because this team lacks spacing. Like, I think putting in Malik Monk in the starting lineup and having DeMar come off the bench would have been the better option. But again, DeMar DeRozan coming off the bench is something that is like almost unheard of in basketball because while he doesn't shoot the three, he is a very, very talented shooter inside the arc, and he's a very talented scorer. But it just doesn't mesh well with the lineup. And I don't expect Mike Brown to be able to coach something like that when his team is already destined to fail. Like, you can't have your three best players not good at defense and not good at shooting the three. Look at the Boston Celtics. Look at their three best players, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and you can argue Derek White is now their third best player. I mean, Jason Tatum, we all know he can shoot the three very well. We know Jaylen Brown can shoot the three-pointer very well. And we know Derek White, he is exceptionally well at shooting the three-pointer, especially this year. And all three of those guys can play defense. Look at the Knicks and their best players. Mikal Bridges, Jalen Brunson, and Karl Anthony Towns. Jalen Brunson, while he's not that good of a defender, he can at least shoot the three very, very well. And he doesn't really take threes all that much. But when you have players like Mikal Bridges and Karl Anthony Towns in your starting lineup as well, Karl Anthony Towns is a fantastic big man who shoots threes a lot and is very good, arguably the best center in NBA history to shoot three-pointers. And Mikal Bridges, he has the highest three-point percentage when shooting corner shots. Like, these players, and on top of that, Mikal Bridges can play defense. So they have a nice balance of players that can shoot inside the arc, defend, and shoot the three ball very, very well. And let me just, off the top of my head, think of some other teams. The Oklahoma City Thunder. While Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is a very, very competent mid-range scorer, he can play defense. And he's upping the three-point counter, like the amount of threes that he takes per game as well. On top of that, he's surrounded by a roster that knows how to shoot the three-pointer very well. What other competent team? The Houston Rockets. They're a team that also can shoot the three ball very well, despite Sengun being a much more inside-the-arc kind of player. And just to name some other teams that are, let's just go ahead and look at some other NBA teams that are in the top spot. Like, we do know the Celtics, they are a very competitive team, and we know that the Bucks, like, you know, I'll just bring the Bucks in. While I'm not very high on the Bucks and their ability to win games, Giannis Antetokounmpo, he can play defense, and while he's not a three-point shooter, Damian Lillard, while he doesn't play defense, he shoots the three-pointers a lot, and he shoots them very well. And Bobby Portis is a little bit of a mix of both. He can play defense and he can also shoot the three-pointer very well along with that. The Dallas Mavericks, Luka Doncic and Kyrie, while they both can't really play defense that well, they're surrounded by a team that can play defense and they can shoot the three very well. And the Phoenix Suns as well, not a very defensive-minded team. And these players are more or less mid-range scorers, but Devin Booker can shoot threes very well, and Kevin Durant can shoot threes very well. You can make the argument that those players, while they don't have defense, they can shoot the three ball much better than DeMar DeRozan, De'Aaron Fox, and Sabonis. Like, I don't think there's anyone that's going to argue that Fox or Sabonis are better three-point shooters than Kevin Durant and Devin Booker and even Bradley Beal. Like, they have a very solid balance of players that can shoot the three and players that can play defense. The Kings, they don't have that. It's more or less like the same, just offensive, inside the arc minded players that can't defend. And that's just a recipe for disaster. And that's not going to have you, the Cleveland Cavaliers, like the guards for Cleveland, Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell, they shoot a pretty even amount of, inside the arc shots as well as outside of the arc shots. While they can't defend, Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley, they are competent defenders. Like, they have that mesh. The Kings don't have that. And in this era of basketball, you simply cannot win with players that are like inside the arc minded. You were able to do that back in 1998 and in the early 2000s, and even then the Spurs, which were a dynasty back in the day, they were a team that was rather balanced at both inside the arc shots and outside the arc shots. You can make an argument that the Spurs, they were the first team to revolutionize the corner three before the Golden State Warriors ultimately made it all that more popular, and Houston proving that it is an offense that's destined to succeed. Like, it's a balance, and the Kings, they just don't have that balance. So I just think that the getting rid of Mike Brown was simply just a scapegoat to cover up the fact that this team is not a very well-balanced team, and this team is not a team that's destined to succeed by any means. Like, that's sort of how I feel about that. But let me know in the comments what you guys think. Maybe you guys don't think that Mike Brown is a competent coach, and maybe him getting fired is a good thing, and it could be a good thing in the end of the day. But I just don't think that the team is. I don't think the team is in a good spot to win any playoff games or even make the playoffs at this point. Let me know in the comments what you guys think of this move and whether or not the Kings made the right decision. But aside from that, that's it for the third segment. So now we're going to go ahead and go into the fourth segment, where I just quickly recap the Week 17 of the NFL, because those games, they ended up happening. I'll also talk about the teams that are in the hunt for a playoff spot and what has to happen in order for them to make the playoffs. So I'll be right back after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And we are back with the fourth segment of the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fourth segment, there's a dog in the background. I can't really do anything about that. I apologize. But in this fourth segment, we are going to be talking about Week 17 of the NFL and the teams that have made the playoffs, teams that are already in the playoffs, teams that are in the hunt for a playoff spot, as well as the teams that that have either won, the teams that lost, things like that, teams that aren't going to be in the playoffs, just the usual stuff in an NFL recap of this week. As we know, we're going into the final week of the NFL. It's been a very rough ride, especially if you're a New York fan. And it's also been a rough ride if you've been a Cowboys fan yet. Don't think I'm going to sleep on the Cowboys. I don't have my cowboy hat with me, but still, something that's really funny that I have to bring to everyone's attention. Micah Parsons, in a post-game interview, he said, if you take away the scoreboard, the game would have been close. Of course, if you take away the scoreboard, the game would have been close. And I might as well talk about that game because we know. The season for the Giants, they started with getting rid of Saquon, and now it ends with losing the number one pick in the draft. So just absolutely fantastic. And Saquon had a great game against the Cowboys. Once again, he recorded 167 yards on the ground. And the Eagles, despite the fact that they don't have Jalen Hurts as their starter for this week, or for last week, they still had a pretty solid game. Solid from their quarterbacks, Kenny Pickett and Tanner McKee. Like, those, Kenny Pickett, he had a funny moment in this game. Like, it looked like he had super glue attached to his gloves as he was trying to throw the ball, but he couldn't let go of the ball. I thought it was very funny. But again, at the end of the day, the Eagles, they ended up winning 41-7 against the Dallas Cowboys. I mean, the Cowboys, they were not going to make the playoffs anyway. The Eagles, they cemented the number one spot in their division, and they're most likely going to host a playoff game once the wild card games start. And I mean, like I said, Saquon had a great game, and despite the fact that they did not have a very competent quarterback, Devontae Smith had a very good game after blowing the last game to Washington by dropping a pass. He caught 2 touchdowns, 6 receptions for a total of 120 yards in the air. Just a fantastic game coming in from Devonta Smith, and really there was nothing that the Cowboys could do. This game was never close to start out. So Dallas, of course, they start out with an interception. That interception was returned for a pick six, and they answered that with a touchdown. The teams exchanged punts. Then the Eagles in the second quarter, they scored a touchdown. Dallas ended up fumbling the ball. Then the Eagles took a field goal. Then Dallas turned the ball over on an interception again. And then the Eagles, they scored a touchdown off of that. To start the third quarter, the Eagles took a field goal. Then the Cowboys punted after a 3-and-out. And then the Eagles scored another touchdown to make the score 34-7. Then to open up the fourth quarter, Dallas fumbles the ball. And then the Eagles, they scored a touchdown to make the score 41-7, where the game remained at a stalemate. And this was just, for someone who likes watching the Cowboys lose, this was a beautiful game. But for someone who doesn't like watching the Eagles win, this was also a bad game. So I'm very mixed. I say this every time. When these two teams go up against each other, I always expect a tie, and I always hope for a tie, just so it ruins both of their teams. But because nobody wants a tie in these NFL games. So they play for 48 minutes or more, because, it has to go into overtime in order for it to tie, just for no winner to be decided. I think ties should be abolished from the NFL, except for those two teams when they go up against each other. But that's really it for that game. Again, nothing really memorable to talk about aside from the fact that Dallas ends up just blowing another game. Speaking of New York football, the Jets, they ended up losing in a shellacking. I mean, they lost 40-14 against the Bills, another New York team, which is probably the only New York team that's feeling rather excited for the playoffs. I don't think Josh Allen is going to win the MVP, but aside from that, putting up 40 points against the Jets, that's not a really impressive feat, despite the fact that he did throw for 2 touchdowns and 182 yards, and also ran for a touchdown. So that's 3 total touchdowns for Josh Allen in this game. In this game, Aaron Rodgers, he played horrible. He had a QBR of 44. He also, at one point, had a QBR of 1.2, which was the worst QBR that Aaron Rodgers has ever put up in his career. Ended the game with 112 yards and 2 interceptions. Again, these interceptions from Aaron Rodgers, even though he is relatively old, one of the oldest players in the NFL, interceptions are just not something that you're usually accustomed to seeing Aaron Rodgers throw. And he even apparently in a post-game interview, he said that he benched himself. Like, they were down by so much, and they decided, okay, why don't we put Tyrod Taylor in the game? Tyrod Taylor played much better than Aaron Rodgers had when Aaron Rodgers was in the game. Tyrod completed 11 of his 14 passes for 83 yards, and he threw for 2 touchdowns, the only 2 touchdowns that the Jets scored in this game. But like the Cowboys game between the Eagles and the Cowboys, this game was never close. So not really much that needs to be talked about aside from the fact that Aaron Rodgers kind of quit on the Jets mid-game, which, again, not entirely sure how that's going to play into the next season, but we will see how that goes. The Vikings, they ended up beating the Green Bay Packers in a very close game, 27-25. Now the Vikings are 14-2, a ridiculous record coming from the Vikings, even though they have Sam Darnold at quarterback, something that I never really expected. Jordan Love seemed to regress a little bit in this game. He threw for 185 yards, 1 touchdown. Josh Jacobs and Emmanuel Wilson both ran for a touchdown in this game. But Sam Darnold threw for 377 yards in the air, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception. And just an overall great game coming in from the Vikings in this one. And after this win, the Vikings, they now have they are now leading in the NFC North. The Lions, they're going to have to win in this in the next game if they're going to want to secure a spot and keep the number 1 seed in the NFC in order to secure a bye week and a spot in they're already in the postseason, but again, they want to have home field advantage. And going into the wild card games, if they're going to have to play in those wild card games, but they've already been confirmed in the playoffs. But they're going to have to go up against the 49ers. They have to win this game if they want to have that first round bye, which is something that's going to be looked at very, very closely. Their game starts at 8:15 later on today, so it's a very, very important game for the Detroit Lions. And the NFC North, very, very, very competitive conference this year. 3 teams from the NFC North have already cemented a spot in the postseason, and now it's really just a battle to see which team is going to end up getting that first round bye between the Vikings and the Lions. Another game that was also really competitive and also had playoff implications was between the Commanders and between the Falcons. If the Commanders, they ultimately ended up winning that game, and as a result of that win, they are now in the playoffs, and they're going to be in the wild card. They're going to play an away game in the wild card because the Eagles, they're going to have home field advantage coming in from the NFC East. So their competition is, and their drive to win is to try and go up against a much easier opponent going into this next week of games and going into the playoffs, because it's much different being a 7th seed as it is being a 6th seed, and depending on the team that you want to play in, depending on the team that you think you'll match up better in, you're going to have to win in those games. Now, this game was very close. It ultimately ended up going into an overtime where Michael Penix and Jaden Daniels both had a legacy drive. Michael Penix ended up tying the game, and they did have a chance to win, but the field goal was short, and so the game went into overtime where Michael Penix never touched the ball again because Jaden Daniels is probably one of the most, if not the most, clutch player in the NFL this year. That game ended with a 30-24 score. Jaden Daniels threw for 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, and while he did not run for a touchdown, he did run for 127 yards on the ground. A great game coming in from Jaden Daniels in this one, and a very important time to have a great game. And Michael Penix, in probably the first important game of his career, he threw 223 yards, the game-tying touchdown drive, and he did throw for 1 interception, but again, just a great game coming in from Michael Penix. And Bijan Robinson, he ended up rushing for 2 touchdowns in this game. And Kyle Pitts, someone who got made fun of a lot last week for dropping a touchdown pass, ended up catching the game-tying touchdown pass. So that's something that I think should be taken into consideration when looking at the games over in this week. And some other scores for the other games. The Panthers, they ended up losing a lot by the Bucs. The Bucs ended up winning 48-14 in this one. Baker Mayfield had a great game, a game that he desperately needed to have in order to secure a home wild card and secure the NFC South. He threw for 5 touchdowns, 359 yards, and he threw as many touchdowns as incomplete passes, which is always a great game from a quarterback. The Dolphins, they ended up beating the Browns 20-3. Let's see what other scores happened. The Jaguars, they ended up beating the Titans 20-13 in this one. Again, a rather meaningless game. None of those games have playoff implications. The Raiders, they ended up beating the Saints, which is something that I needed in order to ensure that the Giants had the first overall pick in this draft. But of course, they messed that up. And the Raiders, they ended up winning 25-10. And over on Saturday, in the Saturday games, the Chargers, they ended up cementing a playoff spot. They clinched a playoff spot after beating the Patriots 40-7. The Bengals, they are now in the hunt after starting 0-3 and 1-4 in this season. They won 30-24 despite Bo Nix throwing a game-tying touchdown to send the game into overtime. And the Rams, they ended up beating the Cardinals. And now the Rams, they seem to be the favorite to win the NFC West, obviously depending on how the rest of these games go. But as of right now, in in the NFC West, It's between them, and it's going to be between the Seahawks. But the Rams, they seem to have cemented their spot in their division. Actually, I think after this game, they're leading in their division. They're 10-6, and it seems like they're going to be hosting a home wild card game. Now, the teams that are in the hunt after last week's games, there's a couple of teams that are in the hunt. And there's obviously all of these teams, they're going to need like a lot of things for them to go their way in order to remain in the hunt. So as of right now, the Falcons and the Buccaneers, they're still in the hunt for a playoff spot. The Bucs, they currently have the best record in their division, and the only team that's really a threat to them in their division is the Falcons. The Falcons, all they need is to win the next game next week. And then the Bucs, they're going to have to lose, and if the Bucs end up losing, then it is possible that the Falcons end up taking their spot as in the 4th seed and hosting a wild card game. So those are the teams that are right now currently in the hunt. It seems like the playoff picture is going to look like the Lions at 1, the Eagles at 2, the Rams at 3. The team that's going to be in the 4th seed is still undecided between the Buccaneers and the Falcons, but it seems like the Bucs are going to be the team that's going to host the wild card. The Vikings, the Commanders, and the Packers, those are going to be the teams that are going to be in the wild card and not hosting a wild card game, but playing away in the wild card. Now, the AFC is where things get a little bit more competitive and where things get a little bit more hectic. So the teams that are in the hunt are the Broncos, the Dolphins, and the Bengals. The Bengals, they have arguably the lowest chance of being able to make the playoffs, especially like going into this next week. The Bengals, they're going to have to play the Steelers. The Steelers and the Ravens, they already have their playoff spots locked down. But the big question is which of those teams is going to end up hosting the wild card as opposed to being in the wild card. I believe they have the exact same record. Well, they close to the same record. The Steelers, they are 1 win away from being able. So the Steelers, they have to win the next game, and the Ravens, they have to lose the next game. And if that happens, then the Steelers are going to take in the number 1 spot in their division, and they're going to host the wild card. And if the Steelers, if they end up losing to the Bengals, which I believe is going to be their next game, then the Bengals, they have a shot of making it into the postseason. And in order for that to happen, the Dolphins, they're going to have to lose a game. They're going to have to lose their last game, but I don't think that's going to happen because the Dolphins are going to play the Jets. And the Broncos, they seem like the favorites to end up making the playoffs, but they're going to go up against the Chiefs. So if the Bengals, if they want to make the playoffs, they're going to have to win, and they have to hope that the Dolphins and the Broncos lose. And if the Dolphins want to make it in, they're going to have to hope that the Broncos lose and that the Bengals end up losing. Or maybe they don't even have to worry about the Bengals losing. Let me just go ahead and check to see their record just to make sure. And no, the Dolphins, they're going to have to hope that the Bengals lose and that the Broncos lose and they're going to have to win if they want to make the playoffs. And for the Broncos, they just got to win. The Broncos, they really, that's all they have to do. They just have to win. But the problem with that is that they're going to go up against the Chiefs. So the win is going to be very important for the Broncos. I'm not entirely sure if the Chiefs are going to end up benching all of their players in the final week. But that's how it's going to work. Not entirely sure if they're going to bench Patrick Mahomes either, but that's how the playoffs are going to work, and those are the teams that are in the hunt, and those are the teams that desperately need a win coming in, and the teams that need to lose in order for teams to make the playoffs. That's how it's going to work. That's all that I have in this 4th segment, so now we're going to go ahead and go into the 5th and the final segment, where I talk about I recently went to a Purdue basketball game, so I'm just going to go ahead and talk about that right after this short break, so be sure to stay tuned if you guys are interested. And we are back with the fifth and the final segment of the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fifth segment, it's going to be a bit of a shorter segment than the rest of them. I'm just going to talk about my experience within the at the Purdue game, because this is the first Big Ten basketball game that I've ever actually attended to. My cousin goes to Purdue, and that was a big reason why I wanted to go to this game, because, everyone on this side of the family is a Purdue fan, and rightfully so for being in basketball. They went to the NCAA finals last year. They didn't end up winning because of that beast UConn was last year, but still making it to the finals in the NCAA is it's a feat in of itself. And while you don't end up, cutting the net at the end of it, still making it to the finals is a great achievement for the school and a great achievement for the program as a whole. But this game, it was very, very exciting. The environment was great. I'm going to post all of the videos that I have that I took from the game over on the channel later on today. So if you guys are interested in the Purdue and how that worked and how the game looked, be sure to tune into that. I got the seats that we got, they were really, really high up, so I was able to see everything on the court and everything that ended up going down. And this game, while it wasn't a competitive game, the final score of this game was 83-64 in favor of Purdue. It didn't feel like it was a boring game. There was no point in the game that I thought was boring, even though they were up by so much. Despite that they were up by so much, the crowd was still very engaged. The crowd loved it. Every single time that Toledo touched the ball, they ended up the home crowd, they ended up booing them, and they ended up trying to distract them as much as possible. And one of the coolest things about Purdue is that if a player misses 2 free throws in a row, then everybody in the crowd ends up getting free chicken, which was awesome. And one of the funniest moments was when one of the players on Toledo, they ended up airballing a free throw. Everybody in the stadium was shouting, "Airball, airball." They were all shouting that, and then he airballed again. And everybody got free chicken, and then the crowd went wild. It was one of the coolest moments in college basketball, in my opinion, that I've experienced live. And my cousin, he warned me that this player right here, his name is Braden Smith. He warned me that he was a great basketball player, and he had a game for the history books for Purdue. He became the first player in program history to drop 30-plus points and record 10-plus assists. Again, in Purdue, and a program that has been glittered and star-spangled with success and talented basketball players, and a very good basketball program, he became the first player to put up a stat line like that. And that is nothing short of impressive, especially in college, because according to someone that I know who used to work in the scoreboard operations in college basketball, assists, they don't really rack up as much in college as they do in the NBA. And that makes sense, especially in Purdue's system. They run a much more ball movement kind of system, as opposed to in the NBA, where it's rather ISO heavy, and the teams kind of rely on either one player to do most of the work, or and that one player ends up getting a lot of assists depending on his role. But in college, the assists don't really stack up all that much, because there's a lot more ball movement and the ball gets shared amongst its players. But the fact that he was able to be the first player in this program to record a stat line like that is nothing short of impressive. And like I said, game was never really close, but the game never felt like it was, because in the NBA crowds, whenever a game is a blowout, and even in my own college at Quinnipiac, the crowd, they sort of die down a little bit. But Purdue, this crowd, they did not hinder in the slightest. Everyone was excited and everybody enjoyed the game. I had a great time, and I almost forgot. I got this. I was able to get this souvenir for the game as well. This is a chain that you can wear while you're in the game. And we all know these Purdue super fans. They wear all sorts of stuff. There were people that had golden wigs on. There were people that had gold chains that go all the way down to their knee. So many people were into this game. It was a great game, and again, while the score was very lopsided, I can only imagine like how the atmosphere would have been if it was a very, very close game, or if they went up against a much more. I don't want to say this team was incompetent, because if you're playing in Division I basketball, obviously you have to be a very good player. But the compared to a team like, comparing a MAC team to a Big Ten team, that's a very steep jump, and that's a very, very it's a large gap, and it's like any team that can compete with the Big Ten, usually those SEC teams, we all know the SEC is just it's littered with sports talent, and the fact that just imagine like how if it was like a Rutgers game, like imagine if Purdue matched up against Rutgers. I think that atmosphere would go absolutely ballistic for every single scenario. And if it's a very close game, then they go even more ballistic. But it's like when Purdue was not scoring and when Toledo was like going on a little bit of a run, because obviously runs happen in basketball. There are teams that go on shooting droughts. The crowd, they get really engaged, and then they start cheering even louder than what they did before. It was a very good experience. I loved every single aspect of this game. And that's all that I really wanted to say. I'll just talk about like my experience in this game, and I'll be posting those videos a little bit later on today if you guys are interested. But that's all that I have for this segment. So thank you so much for tuning in to the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for more content and updates. And as usual, we'd love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether it's a hot take, whether it's a burning question, or something you're dying to share. We are all ears. If you want your comment or question to get noticed, I recommend using Super Chat. You click on the $ below the chat box and send in your comments and or donations that way. Or you can use the link displayed below the ticker, gsmcpodcast.net, to send your comments and donations that way. Either or really helps the show. That's all that I have today on this podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm your host, Nelson, and as always, take care, happy holidays, and happy New Year's to you all.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee